everyone, my name is Rachel Thompson, and today I'd like to consider the Boston Freedom Trail. Should we not be recreating the world of the working tradesmen of the pre-industrial era? And where are the taverns where events of the Revolution were hatched? If we ponder the limitations of what has survived, we may find ways to compensate for what is missing. Will it be harder for Boston to come to grips with class than it was for colonial Williamsburg to confront race? That, of course, comes from Revolution in Boston, 8 Propositions for Public History on the Freedom Trail, one of our required readings this week. This quotation reflects the critical lens of Young, as he discusses the challenges of curating public history to reflect the context and social dynamics not self-evident from visits to historic buildings. Simply put, the buildings cannot speak for themselves. And when he wrote this article, he was arguing that there was more work to be done in better curating spaces that reflect multiple visions of the American Revolution in Boston. Among the sites featured on the Freedom Trail is the Battle of Bunker Hill Monument. The battle was a defeat, of course, but the monument celebrates the resilience and the bravery of the Continental Army as they stood against the formidable British Army, perceived to be better equipped with men, supplies, expertise. I learned that the cornerstone was laid by the Marquis de Lafayette in 1825 on the 50th anniversary of the battle. The USS Constitution is also featured along the Boston Freedom Trail. That is, of course, the oldest commissioned warship still afloat and known as Old Ironsides from its fame in the War of 1812. The Boston Common is the oldest public park, established in 1634. Boston Latin School is the oldest public school in America, and its iconic Benjamin Franklin statue designates the location of the original school structure. 5 signers of the Declaration of Independence attended Boston Latin School. The Old Corner Bookstore is the oldest commercial building in Boston, and it was built on a site where Anne Hutchinson once lived. King's Chapel is a prominent 18th century Anglican church, and its adjacent burial ground actually predates the church. King's Chapel Burying Ground is the final resting place of a lot of early Puritan residents, including John Winthrop. Park Street Church is a hallmark site for the Young Republic. It's of 19th century construction. A little after the Revolution, the Granary Burying Ground is the final resting place of some of history's key revolutionary leaders. The Copp's Hill Burying Ground is also a key point where many of Boston's North End residents were buried, mostly merchants, artisans, and craftspeople. Old South Meeting House is an old meeting house for Puritans to worship. It witnessed a lot of important gatherings during the Revolutionary era and the years leading up to the fighting in the Revolution, including the gathering at which the Sons of Liberty decided to destroy British tea. The Old State House was once the center for Boston's colonial government, and it was the first place where in 1776 the Declaration of Independence was read to the people of Boston. Faneuil Hall is a forum and meeting hall once frequented by the Sons of Liberty. Paul Revere's home is the only house on the tour, and it only narrowly escaped demolition. Many other leaders of the Revolutionary era who had homes in Boston, their houses did not have the same fate, including John Hancock. However, the Massachusetts State House, its land was once cow pastures of John Hancock. And lastly, I'll mention the site of the Boston Massacre, which is also along the Freedom Trail. And importantly, it mentions in the article that it's little more than a plaque. Upon visiting, there's a plaque that features little other context. And we might learn from the Freedom Trail that this is a fragmented understanding of history at best. Young argues in the article that the history that survives in Boston and that's featured along the Freedom Trail is a result of deliberate choices made by Bostonians over a very long period of time. There are spaces that might have been featured on the Freedom Trail that were destroyed in the 19th century and some that only narrowly escaped destruction in the 20th century. And he suggests that it's up to modern-day curators of public history in order to tell a more diverse version of the history of Boston that represents the social stratification and inequality of Boston at the time. Our Middlecoff text, The Glorious Cause, the American Revolution, 1763 to 1789, says, In Boston and Philadelphia, to cite a different sort of example, the lower half of society held 5% of the taxable wealth. This demonstrates the inequality between the rich and the poor in Boston. There might be more work to do to more purely tell the story of social stratification in Revolutionary era Boston. Even Copp's Hill Burying Ground can't do the work on its own of demonstrating the diversity of the Old North End. I'd like to leave off on an idea that I found powerful in the article, and a legacy that might be better featured in the Freedom Trail. Young reiterates in the article that this was a moment of equality in an otherwise very unequal Boston, where members of the lower classes like Hughes could be united with members of the upper class like John Hancock, simply because of their determination and their conviction in their ideals.